But we have two guest speakers, the topic From Theory to Practice, the secrets of harnessing data for maximum impact. And we have Matthew Gregson from, doesn't say on here, does it?
Howden.
It only says Howden though. That's what threw me. It's not just Howden now, is it? And Rachael Kneen, Wellbeing Director at Experian. So hand over to you guys.
Wonderful, thank you. Right, everybody. I stand between you and lunch, but I figure I'm going to ask you to indulge me quickly and earn your lunch, if you don't mind. For those of you happy to, could you all stand up for me? I just want to take a count of the room very quickly to get us started. Okay. Stay standing if you think you have great benefits today. Okay, a lot of confident people in the room. And stay standing if you think you've got the data that proves your level of confidence in just how great your benefits are. Few thinking about it. A couple of familiar faces in the middle of the room there. Congratulations. That is the right answer, seeing as we've got Rachael up on stage. There's a huge amount to get through, so I'm going to try and race through it all more than anything so you can actually get to hear from Rachael, who is the practitioner in this space. I'm far more sure you'll be wanting to hear from her rather than me. For those of you who don't know, what I'm going to talk through now is on the basis of our research that we do with REBA every year. It's around benefit strategy and design. If you're in the last session, my friend and colleague, David, from now Barnett Waddingham, part of the Howden family, would have talked about it. And this year we focused on the use of data. The reason being is for all of us standing up saying that we have great benefits, right? Doesn't matter where you are, it's very, very unlikely any of you have exactly the same benefit programs, right? And I'm not here today to tell you that a 10% pension or family healthcare or flexible benefits is the right answer, is the gap in what you're doing. I think the big thing, I'm going to be honest, and they always say be mindful of your audience, and I always forget that advice from everyone that teaches me about how to present. I think we are generally all rubbish at actually that piece that you all sat down on, which is having the data to help us assess and understand whether or not our program is actually great, whether or not it's achieving the goals we want it to achieve, and if not, what we should be doing instead. There's one thing that I've always said, which is it's far better to have the right thought process than it is to think that you've got the right outcome. And so we designed this research, which I'll eventually get off slide one. Again, another really bad habit of mine, mindful of the time, is what stages do we actually need to go through to work out whether or not we've got great benefits? So for us, it has to start with the idea of having the data that you need to simply validate that question. Do we have what great looks like? I'm not going to bore you with the agenda, other than again say that I will get to Rachael, as no doubt. Please submit plenty of questions for her. So within the research, we kind of walk through this thought process of going, who's doing what today and what outcomes is it leading to? And appreciating how many of you would have contributed to the research. So thank you, those of you who did. And as I say, without preaching to the choir, basically, we're all a bit rubbish at this today, is my summation. Like, if you've got to be anywhere, that's the key takeaway of the session. Feel free to leave. But no, in all honesty, there are so few of us, it seems, who are honestly going through a robust process of saying, what are we trying to achieve? What do we want to measure that will show us whether or not we're doing it? How do we then hypothesize that where we are not fulfilling the brief, we should change something? How do we action it? And how do we measure whether or not it had impact? Right? If that's the thought process I think we should all be applying to the running of our benefits programs, the research, as the headline message basically says, too few of us are doing that today. Thankfully, Rachael and the team are, which is why she's going to be up talking about her experience and answering your questions. But I'm going to walk you through some of this. So the first thing we asked was about the role and importance of data. And ultimately, again, I would challenge yourselves to all think about it in this way. If the CFO, CEO, managing partner, whoever that person is, that thinks that you're in charge of that typically millions, if not tens of millions of pounds benefit spend, asked you that question. How much are we spending and what value are we getting from it? I'm guessing the answer to this without asking you all to stand up again. For how many of you would that be the response? Right? Like, I've been doing this for 24 years. I kind of love employee benefits. I figure I'll do it for the rest of my career. But there's a big thing that I always really struggle with philosophically, which is this a big enough problem to solve that it warrants doing it well enough? Right? And I mean that with all sincerity, because if you think about it, if you're a smaller business, you know, if you're a startup, benefits might not even be on the radar. They might not be part of the EVP. People might be joining you for equity or for career progression or a shot at a big job title or something else. But the question I always ask is, you know, how important does this need to get in order for us to want to run it, govern it, and drive outcomes effectively? A way I often talk to clients as well, to put into context for you. So let's say the part of the Howden EB business I run is about a 25 million pound P&L. I should probably know the number exactly. Thankfully, my boss is in the room. Let's say it's in that ballpark. Some of you will run a benefits program 3-4 times the size of that. Yet if you think about it, I have to report on revenue, profit, client satisfaction, employee satisfaction, a whole host of metrics that says that I'm looking after that money well. It's amazing that even when your benefit budgets run into the millions and tens of millions, no one's there going, what are the set of metrics that are showing that you are spending that portion of the company's money well? Right? I think that's the conundrum that we're here to solve, and something I think we need to do better than we are today. It's probably already my 25 minutes up. No, we're doing well. We're doing all right. So, although that sounds quite doom and gloom, I think there's a few things that are, from our data and our research, going well today and some things that aren't. And the reason I have these up on screen is for us, there's some very clear measures of success. And I wonder how many of you have these up there in lights as the key things you say you're trying to achieve with your programs, right? On the right-hand side, in terms of things that apparently are going well, benefit take-up, right? The demand for healthcare, actually the investment in pensions, even through a cost of living crisis, have all typically increased. Within flexible benefit programs, we're still seeing take-up on the rise, particularly of key benefits where, again, access to it is a challenge, like dental and other types of products. So benefit take-up is going through the roof. Also, when you ask employees, if you've ever asked your own, if you've read a bit of research, generally speaking, they'll say that benefits are more important than ever, right? Probably because if I'm standing there going, I don't have healthcare for myself and my family, and it's not offered by my employer, then I'm louder than I was before in saying that's an expectation of mine. So there are some things that are going well. Employees are typically appreciating benefits more than ever, and they're engaging with them more than ever. But on the negative sides, there's some real challenges still that exist. I've not even put cost in there, which we'll come on to. But fundamentally, retirement outcomes continue to dwindle and decline, right? And again, this is pivotal to how we're using data well, or in most cases badly today. Absence and productivity. If you ask CIPD, ONS, and other measures of the state of overall UK PLC, they'll tell you those statistics are on the decline. The interesting thing is, I doubt almost anyone in the room has a measure of either of those two things accurately inside your own business. So I always wonder, how does CIPD manage to be able to tell me that 7.8 days on average we lose to absence, yet you couldn't tell me inside your business? Right, again, when does a problem get big enough to actually solve it in the proper way? And mental and physical well-being are on the decline as well. You know, it's quite a bleak outlook, but when you look at why you're making the investment that you are in benefits, there's an awful lot of indicators that are saying it's probably not going as well today as you hoped it would. And actually, I think when it comes down to it, we're not applying the rigor to understanding what those problems are unique to our organizations and how we should be fixing it. That means that those problems aren't getting properly addressed. The one caveat to all of that, you know, suggesting as reward professionals we're all rubbish at our jobs, is it is also incredibly complex and difficult to solve, right? Well-being is still a very nebulous thing. And typically speaking, it's very, very hard to say, we've done X, and therefore we believe or we can demonstrate that mental health has improved, right? Because everyone's version of their mental health is different, and everyone's version of what they need to improve their mental health is different as well. And so being as complex as it is, I will acknowledge that it is a challenge more to solve the things on the left than maybe it is the things on the right. But I'm rambling on. The point is, how many of you has those as metrics today that are proving whether or not you're successful in your programs? The answer is typically too few. And the other reason that we wanted to focus on data this year, and again, to challenge you all in your own thinking perhaps, and look, this is the purpose of this research, it's to give you an opportunity to reflect on where are you at versus what this is all telling us, right? Because this was the interesting thing. This actually came from last year's research, which was the vast majority of people that said when it came to getting change approved inside their organization, budget was the biggest barrier, right? Now, I'm going to call BS on that one. It's not budget. It's probably never budget that's your biggest barrier. I think we need to change our approaches and our behaviors, because look at the two I've circled in red at the bottom, right? Firstly, the kind of second one from the bottom, we lack the evidence needed to demonstrate that we'll deliver results, right? How many people have turned around and said, we'd like to implement, you name it, Flex, fertility health, the next mental well-being app, whatever it may be, but the proof of demonstration that will have a positive impact for your business is missing, because we're not rigorous enough in our application of why should we bother doing this. And secondly, that goes hand in hand with this, we don't gain enough consensus from our stakeholders who believe that the change is required. Now, I would suggest if we're all going to walk out today, at least thinking, A, hopefully I'm not entirely mad, and B, I'm talking about something that genuinely you see in your day-to-day, I think our first thing is we need to flip the narrative on its head, right? We need to go, my first job is to get the data and the evidence that proves what we need to do. And the second thing is I need to manage my stakeholders and their belief that investment in it or change of our benefit and wellbeing programs will manifest a better outcome for the business, that when I come to them either with problems or solutions, they're already at the table engaged with and agreeing that this is something that needs to be addressed. But again, as the research is going to show today, we're fundamentally lacking in those two bottom things, and yet we blame it on the fact that the money just isn't there. Right? I think we need to fundamentally change. I've said fundamentally a lot. It's a big word. It's my word of the day. Fundamentally, we need to stop thinking it's about a lack of budget and start thinking it's about a lack of evidence and a lack of consensus if we're going to solve these problems. So, what was the research telling us? There's a huge amount of charts, numbers, words on here, probably too small to read unless you're photoing it and then you can zoom in later. We'll share the slides with anyone who would like them as well. But the point is, there's a few key stats that have come out of all of this. Firstly, we've asked, where were people making major change in the last 2 years? Right? So back to the idea of, if it was the status quo, and if you weren't needing to respond to employee demand, competitive pressures, lack of access to healthcare in the NHS, etc., then you might say, look, this is all lovely, Matthew, but we're not responding to challenges right now. So we're just maintaining the status quo. But as you can see, and this may be reflective of all of you as well, so many of us are making major change to our programs. We see this, the number of our clients who are looking at whole of workforce healthcare, and whether that means medical insurance for everyone, some light offering, a cash plan, an app, an alternative. But those are the big decisions that are happening across the market right now, right? Most people are thinking about the need to make major change, which warrants a stronger, more robust way at looking at how do we present the need for change, how do we engage our stakeholders. So, lots of change happening, particularly in the health and well-being space. So, now we know where people are trying to affect positive change for their business. How are they going about it? Again, huge amount of detail on this slide. I'm just going to whiz us through the highlights. But it's interesting as to whether or not we go for board approval for change. And it's also interesting the shape of the chart. That pensions, which let's face it, the board readily understand that, right? And the level of financial decision you're likely making around your pensions will run into percentages of payroll and potentially millions of pounds. So no doubt we're engaging the board with the idea of we need to change our pension for better or worse. The more alarming thing is that rapid tail off towards the fact that when it comes to things like well-being, it's so difficult to engage the board with the idea that true investment in well-being is worthwhile and will deliver results to the business. And Rachel, I promise I call on you a couple of times for this. One of the biggest things that you'd seen, and I'll let you describe it, but was how even with all of your success, your sponsors and your board still weren't bought into the idea that well-being was, dare I say, worthwhile, right? And you had to change the narrative on that.
Yeah, I think it was probably too far away for them to understand. So what we kind of did is take a step back and say, well, actually, you've got well-being, you've got benefits, you've got reward, and you've got total reward. Actually, it's all one. So how do we start to bring it together? And we start to think about the journey that somebody's going to go from a well-being perspective. So from an everyday all the way through to a long-term support that somebody may need from their well-being perspective. And that's whether you can really do a neat role in terms of your benefits. So actually, your benefits will support you at every step of the direction. But then also kind of getting them to have a little bit more skin in the game. So actually having an accountable executive for each of our different pillars of well-being, so we can be really clear in terms of what's the problem that we're trying to solve and what's the data telling us, both externally and also how our colleagues are feeling. What data are we telling us about our existing benefits and where's the opportunity? So how do we take it maybe from something that I thought was a little bit fluffy and maybe what's the business context and impact that it's going to have, and actually how can we show the real impact and risk of us not doing something? But also let's take great comfort because we've already got lots of solutions in place, but we can drive a greater connection.
Thank you. So, number one in what we need to change, because this is all about how I think we need to change our approach. First thing is, we need to actually bring all of this up to a narrative at a board level. And if there's a lack of understanding or engagement, then we need to think it's incumbent on us as to what language do we change and otherwise. PwC did a survey in 2023 asking chief executives what are their priorities on their agenda. 90% of UK chief executives said that well-being was fundamental to the performance of their business, right? Again, let's call BS on that. You know, it's a lovely thing to say, isn't it? Yeah. As the chief exec, particularly of a listed business, I sponsor the well-being of our people. There's a massive disconnect. They're not engaged in your decision-making process around it at all. And why? Because it's a leap for them to believe that investment in well-being is going to drive performance and productivity outcomes for the business. They can. We need to change the narrative and be more robust. This also goes to another interesting point, and I am going to get light on time now, so it's the speed round, people. We then asked, okay, who are you engaging? But the next thing is, what data are you using to engage in change? And you'll see the vast majority of the time, there's two key highlights on this page. One, there is a massive over-reliance on benchmarking, right? I won't ask you to name and shame yourselves, but the banks and the lawyers in the room, you only care about who's doing what down the road, right? And there's an over-reliance on this through a competitiveness lens. In fact, we've just done a separate bit of research following up on this with our own client base around their engagement with pensions. And they predominantly said the only reason the board would sign off a change or improvement to pensions is competitive threat. Not whether or not their people are going to have a good retirement outcome, not whether or not it adds to the EVP and will have people better attracted to the firm and engaged and working harder. No, purely if the guy down the road is doing more than I am, right? So number two thing we need to change, we have an over-reliance on benchmarking and we have a complete lack of understanding of return on investment. So we are not typically trying to project forward anything about the positive impacts we can have, certainly not in metrics, in financial terms. What's really interesting, I did a webinar on this to our client base about 3 weeks ago, which is why I'm so well versed in it today, as you can clearly tell. And the number one question I got back in the Q&A was, all right, Matthew, then what is ROI? Well, ROI is really simple. If I skip back 5 slides and you'd agree with me that appreciation, that productivity and performance, that those metrics are fundamental to the success of your program, then ROI is simply anything that improves those statistics that you can prove that it can. Right? It doesn't need to be something more nebulous or abstract, like I can't prove how much it's moved the dial on retention. You know, you have to believe that if you've asked your people and understand how important benefits are to your EVP, then you must be able to cause and effect, correlate an improvement in appreciation and engagement with benefits to a positive impact on EVP, retention, and otherwise. Right? That ability to measure, to focus is there, but there's a real lack of understanding at the moment as to what ROI really is and looks like. Next thing, I think we all need to change. Right. Why does all this matter? It matters because for all of you that were busy trying to make change in the last 2 years, 34% of you had a proposal rejected by the budget holder, right? I don't know who's in the room going, yeah, we want to do flex for the first time. They said no. Yeah, I was really advocating for an extra 2% into the pension. They said no. Whatever your scenario is, I've seen a few smirks in the room. 34% of you, someone has said no to what you want to do. Why? Lack of evidence, lack of consensus, I doubt lack of budget. So this is very real, right? When I talk about we should all do this better, there's a reason why. 34% of us have had something rejected. It's interesting that flex or choice is at the top of that list. Again, our own experience in the last year or so, we were never, historically, when we've been pitching for flex, particularly for if you want flex for the first time, the narrative wasn't ROI. In the last year, every single client prospect that's come to us has said, I need to now prove once again the ROI of these things. Yes, budgets are getting tighter. I'm not deluded. I read the press. I see where the stock market and GDP is at. But fundamentally, if there is proof of ROI, there is typically impetus to make change. And it's no surprise to me that flex is at the top of that list of declines. And a very quick stat with time moving on that I will skip past quickly is when we look to the future, we asked everybody who responded to the survey, okay, what's the probability that things will get rejected into the future without robust data, insight, and demonstration of impact? And you can see we're kind of up at 80% of people recognize that there is a significant chance that something will get rejected without it. So again, we all say that, but the reality is none of us are building to a point, I think, and again, you all stood up and stood down quite quickly on my second question, none of us are building to a point where we've got those metrics in place to show what success is, or indeed what failure is, and why you need to close the gap. So it's real, right? We have a problem here that needs solving. The other big thing with this we'll come on to is general governance, right? Those first few stats were all around you wanting to make change and your likelihood of success in getting the change that you want for your programs. We also asked everybody, and those of you who contributed might remember, around just day-to-day, what data is available, what do you see as important, and do you report it upwards to the powers that be? And generally speaking, again, it's a pretty poor showing, right? A lot of people here, when we look at, this is a chart of how important do you see each of these data points or metrics to the running of your program? Yep, sure enough, everyone sees cost as important, brilliant. But you look at the bottom three, or even the bottom four, take up of choice, if we have flex or whatever we might describe as a choice we give our people, absence trends, pension outcomes, we're simply not seeing them as important enough. And yet, you know, if you think about it through an employee's lens, why the hell are we investing in people's pensions if not to drive a good retirement outcome? Right? So those of you in the room in the retail sector who are still doing auto-enrollment minimums versus those of you in the banking sector doing 15% non-contributory pensions, there's a reason why. Because as part of your EVP, typically speaking, those in retail do not care about pensions as much as those in banking. But neither way are we measuring that or understanding whether or not we're supporting that outcome. Right? We just have gaps all over the place in terms of what we're prioritizing in thinking about how we're running and successful or not with our programs. When we look at what data is available, it's fascinating. I'm going to skip onto a slide quite quickly. Everyone is saying the information is broadly there. Now, again, we go down to the bottom. Well-being scores, I've already acknowledged, is a difficult thing, but not impossible to measure. We have it as part of the program we run with Experian. And pension outcomes, we're telling ourselves, are incredibly difficult to measure. They're not, right? But it's fascinating that otherwise, the important thing is we're saying we've broadly got all the data that we need. But when we look at what are we reporting up to senior leadership, right? Think of it as governance, right? What are we trying to do? How well are we doing it? And are we telling people how well we are spending that tens of millions of pounds of the business's money on benefits? The truth is we've got massive gaps in how much we're actually reporting upwards. A lot of focus on cost and employee satisfaction. And to not be all doom and gloom, I would say those are your first two metrics. Those are the table stakes, right? If you can go back to my question at the very start on slide number 3 or so, if you can go, we're spending 10 million and our people really love it, those are your table stakes. You're doing probably a pretty decent job. Even though people are saying they're reporting that, if I asked you all to stand up again, say only stay standing if you are reporting those two metrics on a frequent basis, I doubt 65% of you in the room would still be standing up. So why is this a problem? The final big theme, and then I'm only a minute over, we're doing all right. The final big theme was around data maturity and the barriers to getting better at this. I'm just going to pause for a second. How compelling is the narrative? How many people put their hands up and go, yep, like you, Matthew, totally agree. I need to get better at this. Thank you for indulging me. Again, that was at least 2/3 of the room. So, it's kind of the inverse of those who pretend that they're reporting good stats up to senior stakeholders. So why? Usability of data, access to external data. Well, what is a benchmark if not external data? So we're overly indexed and reliant on it, yet more than half of us have said it's really hard to come by. Lack of the tools, incompatibility of data. One of the big missions we go on with Experian, and bring Rachael into this soon, is going through that journey and going, okay, if we know what's important to people and we know what they think about what we're doing today, and they engage with it or not, and they tell us whether or not that's got a good personal outcome for them, we have a closed loop of data that's telling us, are we doing the right things or not? You can bring together multiple data sets to help explain that journey, right? But it's fascinating that if you look at the bottom there, only 6% of respondents went, nope, all's good. I've got the tools, I've got the data, I've got the partnerships I need to drive success, right? And appreciate most of you put your hand up anyway, but this is something that urgently needs fixing, right? This wasn't me on stage, but this was your MD, your chief exec, and they went back to how much are you spending and what value are we getting? And I want to know. And why don't you know, right? That's not unfair of them to ask, right? Yet we're in this position. So, huge amount we need to fix. As I said, it's not about, is it 10% pension or 12? It's not about, is it family healthcare or a cash plan? It's not about, is flex going to work for us or not? It's what goals do you believe your investment in benefits should drive? Start to measure them in every and any which way you can, and truly understand the gap from where you think you should be and you are today. That's the only way to know, is it 10% or 12? Is it family healthcare or single? Is it flex or not? Right? There's no guesswork involved. We just need to get better at articulating what we're trying to do, what would be our measures of success, and whether or not we're doing it today. I'm going to rally the troops. I suggest school report is, we must all try harder. Right, with that in mind, I'm going to bring Rachael into the fore. You've heard enough from me already. We'll take your questions. I've got a few for her as well, but hopefully for the, still 20 minutes, I think, right? 20 minutes at the back? Ish? Yeah? We'll happily take your questions. Please, no stunned silence. I know I've thrown a lot at you there, but would welcome your thoughts. What are you trying to solve? What do you want to hear from us? Thank you.
So there's a couple of questions already. So let me start with those, why others maybe pop some questions in. So let me think. I'll probably pop this to Matthew first. What is the role of AI in data and decision-making for board approval?
So it's a fascinating one. And I must admit, I'm someone who likes to play around with it already a lot. I did write my own presentation, I'll hasten to add, but theoretically, I could have asked AI to do it for me. No, look, in all honesty, it's a fascinating question. Firstly, because most organizations do not know what their AI policy is yet, right? So let's not run away with this. Absolutely, AI is effectively a more robust, deeper, more effective analytical tool, right? That's what it's there. And a more efficient one because of the way in which I can engage with it and ask it in a very heuristic way to try and mine and interpret data and information for me. So it's a hugely valuable asset. But the biggest problem is, at the moment, what's your company's internal policy? What tools are you allowed to use? What data you're allowed to put in it? Because needless to say, unless you believe you've got a fully segregated solution on, let's say, something like Llama, right? I think that's probably one of the best AI platform tools out there. That's going to cost a business, what, 5 to 10 million quid? So unless you're already down that journey in multiple other parts of the business that you can piggyback on, the truth is you're a long way from being able to use AI in your own benefits journey today. Rachael, would you?
Yeah, I'd agree. And also, I think you can also start to utilise it just to help you as an individual start to digest information. So in terms of, it can give you a really good independent viewpoint in terms of chucking it into a Copilot or a ChatGPT, and it's fascinating the insights that it can start to give you as well. So it probably can help you on that journey in terms of question areas to probe into. But I just think it's one of those tools, whereas previously you'd think, I'm going to Google that. Now it's kind of actually, what does an AI model help in that kind of decision-making process? And we've used it quite a lot in terms of how it can help us with some of our communications. So it kind of gives us a good 80% draft. So actually we can then really spend the time then kind of thinking through what's the frame, pitch, messaging. Does a much jazzier job and uses emojis, which I'm not great at. So it probably makes it feel a bit more hip and current. I think it's a really great tool that we just need to start to utilise more, and it will become even more powerful as it starts to kind of get integrated into more and more things.
And I think there's another question that I was going to come on to, which fits nicely. I'll stay with you, Rachel. What skills do you think the benefits team of today need? And let's take that a stage further, even of the future. So what's your team?
Yeah, I definitely say for my team, they're smiling, is a big kind of thing on curiosity and continuous improvement. So I kind of think there's always that, how can we be 1% better in everything that we do? So in terms of the world around us is moving so quickly. So I think it's on all the team to have that constant horizon scan in terms of what's going on externally and how do I continuously keep myself up to date in terms of and then what does that mean for our context, and how do we start to then utilise data to be able to connect many different things so we can start to tell a story. And I think the ability to tell a story is so important. So you can kind of take people on a journey and you create a real burning platform as to why is this a real big problem for us to solve for? Why do we need to do some things? So by the time you get to then the decision point, your kind of storytelling's on that journey. And then I think there's tooling that we can use that can make us even more effective and quicker at doing things. So how do we kind of harness those powers that I think can then free up more time then to kind of have some of that external thought leadership time?
No, I was going to say, any thoughts on that? Definitely, Matthew.
Yeah, thank you. There's a key thing for me here in this to complement what Rachel said, which is being customer-centric when it comes to your employees. That's not necessarily that new, but it's certainly something that some of you will already talk about, right? You already think about it, that your employees are your customers. You're thinking about their experience inside the organisation. But in reality, I think even those organisations and firms that think in that way today probably pay lip service to it, because when's the last time they sincerely ask them what their needs and expectations are of the business when it comes to this realm that we call benefits and well-being, right? If it was an external customer, you do market research. You'd be thinking about how your value proposition aligns to it. Again, it's this thing of going, if I'm doing that for my business that's worth 20, 25 million quid, and you're running 100 million pounds of pension and benefits spend and not doing the same. So I think we need to think about employees as customers of the organisation, but actually we need to apply a customer-centric skill set to it, right? Research what are their wants, needs and expectations, and how do we mirror that back to them in the services that we're bringing to them.
And I think I'll just build on that from kind of our experience in terms of what I find, maybe others do in the room, is sometimes blockers internally from getting that time with colleagues, with all the other demands, questions. Any thoughts on that at all? How?
Yeah, so we actually intentionally run some targeted kind of surveys with our colleagues. We run every 2 years what we call a total reward optimization survey. So we ask our colleagues, what do you think about our benefits? How well are we doing at that? Is there underserved needs that you have? What are your well-being needs and priorities? And it's a really great opportunity for us to kind of put our colleagues to give us a really honest viewpoint in terms of where they're at, and actually how well our offering is supporting their needs. But it kind of gives us this nucleus then to kind of take a step back and say, okay, so we've got some real gaps, and in some places actually we need to do a better job in terms of how we're communicating. So how do we bring it to life? How do we better connect kind of people to benefits and well-being, and how do we start to show that story and the connection? So I can remember the first time we did it, I was kind of incredibly nervous, kind of thinking, oh my goodness, what on earth is going to come back on this? And then having to then go and present that back to the executive team. But we're now in our third cycle now of doing that. So it's just kind of become part of how we operate. And then we complement that alongside kind of Great Place to Work and listening surveys. So we get that continuous pulse check. But I do think having the ability to be able to use existing survey mechanisms and actually having something like a benefit survey are so powerful to give you the real honesty in terms of how your organisation's feeling.
And just to add to that, with the work we've done together, saying benefit survey might sound a little bit vanilla, right? But if I take the experience we've been on together and with Rachel and her team, a couple of years ago, it clearly identified that we were still in the cost of living crisis as far as their employees were concerned, and financial well-being was a major issue. The first thing was, and again, hopefully not speaking out of turn, the one major stakeholder inside the business was the one who latched onto financial well-being as opposed to other elements of the program. And we really felt that, even as an external partner, let alone internally. We then went through a whole program of activity. There were some targeted specific things around share save, retirement, and other programs we knew we needed to execute. But then 2 years later, when we actually asked people, how well are you versus 12 months ago? If we were to break that down, physical versus financial and mental, financial well-being was significantly over-indexed in a positive way in terms of their responses. When we asked them, what do you remember engaging with throughout the year? Was it our Build Your Pot campaign? Was it our Share Save campaign? Whatever it may have been, those were the highest stats. When we looked at what people actually did, so without the company changing its contribution structure, about 300 people paid more into their pension as a result of the campaign of activity we did. It started with a survey, but we could actually then plot out, okay, where was the gap? Where's the sponsorship? Where's our planned activity? Where's the measurement of it in terms of what people actually did? And how did that correlate to how they actually feel about it afterwards as a result? So now, financial well-being has gone from a top priority needs to fix, I personally think, to a we can keep it stable. Because if we just do the same thing, we know we get traction with it, we know we get results with it. Whereas by comparison, you could probably talk around mental health and resilience. Now that's flipped to being top priority. And so say, how do we replicate that model knowing that our priorities have changed?
Yeah, and I do think it's kind of really important in terms of, because well-being can be sometimes really hard to kind of say, how are you turning the needle? So our absence data is really low. So how do we get the data points that kind of prove that this is having an impact? So having that measurement journey is really helpful to kind of say, what's the problem that you need to solve, where the underserved needs are? What's the gap in terms of what's the potential solution or campaign that you can run? How can you measure that campaign? So when we did our financial well-being, the campaign was, how do you get people to be financially fit for your future? And your future could be a whole range of different objectives. But we're able to, and we said actually, we believe that pensions is a really important area that we want to kind of close the gap. And we're able to then run a campaign, give awareness, and we knew that kind of maybe people, where are people on that education journey? There's some gaps, and then we can then track that through. So now we're definitely not perfect. So now we look at the next area to kind of fix this. Okay, so what can we do from a mental health perspective? So how, and that's probably a little bit harder, I think, in terms of the data points, in terms that you can prove on that journey. But try and say, look, you know, how can you kind of use the data to say, look, you know, the most recent surveys identified this is our next area that we really want to focus on. What's the campaign that we can do to kind of really, drive education and awareness, connect people to the benefits that we offer that can hopefully provide some of those support resources. But then what's the impact that all of that's going to drive, and the so what? So when we go back to the executive team, we've kind of got that story. So I think it's just giving yourself the time to take the step back and think, where are you? What's the problem that you're trying to solve for? What's the potential campaign? But most importantly, how can you measure it? And how can you then prove? And sometimes the measurements, you know, like trying to tie it back to attrition, well, it's quite tenuous because there could be a whole range of different things that could be impacted. So trying to pick a measure that we can control and show an impact, and then connecting broader data points, I think is kind of really helpful.
Love it. Lots of practical insights there, and a million miles away from just benefit uptake, which we were saying on the slide, isn't it? The data you've got there, which goes lovely onto a question that a few people are interested in, Rachel, to you. What has been your data journey? Maybe you've covered that a little bit, but do you have a dashboard? How regularly do you report on it? Who do you report it to? Maybe some of the mistakes along the way that the audience can take away from.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is where, if you've got a benefit broker, utilise them, is my best example, because it's actually really hard to get some of the data, and then you get data in like a PDF, a PowerPoint. Like, I just want it in Excel so I can then create a Power BI dashboard that kind of brings it all together. So it's actually sometimes really hard to get those data points. I'd kind of say use your providers that you have and say, actually, what are your requirements of how regularly do you want that? We moved into a quarterly cycle in terms of trying to get that data and keep it updated. We do have a dashboard, and that dashboard now feeds into our quarterly sessions with our executive sponsors. And now they're really curious to kind of dig into, so what's our BUPA data telling us, Rach? And what can we do about that? Oh, is that a big area that we might need to focus on? But it took us a real long time to get that area. So one of the bits I always say to the team is, well, let's get something up and running, let's get our first release, and we can make it better and better over time. But it's actually quite hard to initially get some of the data out of our providers in the way that we could utilise that all. and then having the technology that can kind of say, okay, so how do you bring in your absence data? What do the engagement scores look like? And then now starting to layer in, so what's the profitability of our business area? So we can start to look horizontally across the area that says, okay, so business unit X are highly engaged in some of our initiatives, so we can see that through their engagement rates. They're attending some of the wellbeing initiatives, and we've seen great inroads in terms of take-up rates. And the profitability scores of those business areas are really great. That's great. And then we look at other areas and kind of say, we're seeing different correlations. We're utilising this now to have a conversation with some of our leaders in terms of some of the connection points that we can start to drive. But I definitely say data collection is a journey. Start small, iterate, but also how can you utilise people to help you to get that information in a way that you can digest it really easily. So I think that's something you could put more pressure on to people like Howden to take with.
Yeah, thank you.
Familiar stories I can hear, but
Indeed.
Please, Matthew.
And there's one thought that I'd add to that in terms of that being a genuine journey is, firstly, when you're measuring all of this, there's very few absolutely right answers, right? You won't be able to look at a metric and go, 78% positive feedback is absolutely the right answer. But in longitudinal terms, you know whether you're better than you were yesterday, right? And in relative terms, you'll know whether or not you're better than maybe the competition are, if you're able to work with people to curate and collect that data, right? So it's very, very hard. In the first instance, you get survey results, benchmark results, you get a lot of data year one, and you go, well, I don't actually know if that tells me if I'm right or wrong. It will probably start to tell you some things which naturally look over-indexed or under-indexed, but 12 months on, 2 years on, as you repeat the cycle, as we do, you start to see, well, we're better than we were a year or 2 years ago. Or when we re-benchmark, are we now better or worse than the competition is? Has the market moved forward, or have we moved ahead of them? Right, and that's the thing, you've just got to trust the idea that I think there is a clear end game. I had some slides that we definitely won't have time for today, but happily share with anyone who wants to chat. That kind of dashboard view of going, this is everything we should understand about our program in one place. But if we can't get to meaningful absence data today, that's okay. Focus on the things you can get. Get that survey data in, get that benchmark data in, analyze the claims data, get the utilization and readership of campaigns and initiatives, right? All of these things you should be able to get data points on. And the only thing I would say is, if any of you are running processes today where you can't get a data point around it, then you're running the wrong process, right? If you look at how internal communications and systems work today, you're guaranteed that if you needed readership data, you can, or click-through rates or anything else, just like you would through a marketing lens, you've got the tools to get to that data. So if you're still sending out emails where you can't get readership, you're simply running the wrong process. So that's another big thing to look at in how you get to this nirvana of understanding what's really happening in the organization.
Love it. We're going to have to stop it there, but lots of learning to take away. You're at a stand number...
Yes, 30 and 32 are there.
32.
You can't miss us.
Come and ask more questions. I think you've got 20 minutes now before the next session. Just before you leave the room, if you wouldn't mind going on the Slido app and giving feedback, and also a big round of applause. Fantastic. Thank you.